everyone please welcome Pat. Oh, he's the longest running pastor at Mount Olivet, our biggest congregation in the USA, right? Or in the ELCA. He's given me some money. I like that.
Nice words. He told we have an hour, and you never let clergy speak longer than that. So we're going to pass the offering plate right now. The dog will be coming by to pick up your gifts. Thanks. And Ed, thanks, and your whole team for putting this together. My story. My first adult beverage, as I like to call them, I remember being in the backyard with my dad. My dad was never home growing up because he was working all the time to make sure we could have food on the table. I was 5 years old, and I reached for his beer, and it tasted good. I think that's odd that a 5-year-old would remember that. And the taste of that, it's like, never drank normally. I mean, if I could drink like a normal person, I'd be drinking all the time. It'd be great. But when high school, it was personality change instantly. You know, we'd do the thing that most high school guys did. We'd steal booze out of our parents' liquor cabinets and pour them all together to drink. Because I have some friends to this day who know how to drink, and they can tell me what this is and that is. I hang out with the guys I went to kindergarten with, and we'll go out, and they'll leave that much in their glass, and I'll say, aren't you going to finish that? I'm done. No, you're not. It was either full tilt or, right? Just drink to get drunk. So personality changed, of course. I became exactly what it says, selfish, self-centered, dishonest, and so full of fear. I would use humor at other people's expense. I would literally make fun of you because I was so insecure in who I was. Didn't want to look and do my own personal inventory. I'll just say, yeah, that's the ugliest thing. You know, all that judgmentalism that most clergy are like that. Did you notice clergy were a lot like fertilizer? You spread us out, we can do some good. You get a bunch of us in one place, it's like, oh, God. You know, they come up to us and they'll say things, oh, Pastor, you're so lovely. And we'll listen to that. And all of a sudden it's... So I still go to anonymous gatherings weekly, not because I'm concerned about consumption of alcohol, marijuana, or cocaine, because it helps me keep my things in check. It's nice for me to go to a place where they don't treat me differently because I wear a dress on Sunday mornings. You know, they say, oh, yeah, Rev's here again. Shut up. My name's Kurt, right? But it's a great, wonderful program. There's that book, and then there's that other book, and they are so tied together for me. It's like I see that and that. It's like, ah. Now, granted, I smoked a lot of dope, and I inhaled deeply. So I'm not the brightest bulb on the tree, right? I couldn't get a real job. So I work 1 day a week. It's great racket, right? You get paid to tell people that Jesus loves them? That's a sin, Kurt. My best thinking was I went to St. John's University, where the truth was taught. Love those Benedictines. Seriously, big fan of Benedictines. This was 1975. I went to Holy Communion for the first time, and they served me communion. Knowing that I was the token Lutheran, because I fit the quota. You know, there was quotas back then. We got to let some non-Catholics in here. Well, so I go to Father Don, and I say, Father Don, you just served me communion knowing that I am not Catholic. Wouldn't the Holy Father's undies be in a bunch? And he laughed at me, or with me, and I still love the man. He says this. He says, we're Benedictines. You love Jesus, you're welcome here. And even if you don't love Jesus, you're welcome here. Oh, my bobber went down hard. Granted, college days was complete personality change, completely self-absorbed. I got a master's degree in drinking in 2 weeks. Not blaming it on the great Benedictines, but if I look back in my life, I knew I had a problem drinking, certainly by junior high. I'm a little delayed, a little slow. And I would use people and I would love things. I love drinking. I love smoking dope. But when cocaine came around, God, with a nose this big, you had to pull a barge up to that thing, right? I just liked how it smelled. A complete self-absorbed, you know what? A severe rectal itch to everyone around me. I would use people and love things. I mean, what kind of guy does that, right? I'll get it. Cook County Morgue? No. Just a show of hands, who's been arrested here besides me? Isn't it great? Talk about a wonderful educational experience. So using drinking, I cram a 4-year degree at St. John's into about 7.5. Because my senior year, this is not a way to go to school, just strongly recommending, so not to tell you what to do. You may not want to do it the way I did. Senior year, I was drunk or stoned for every class. That's really expensive and dumb. I was convinced that I was supposed to be an officer in the Marine Corps. Right? Grew up at this wonderful church called Mount Olivet Lutheran Church. Jesus and I were on a first-name basis. The chemicals come on board, and I got it, man. I'm fine. See ya. Yeah. So run away from church because I feel guilty as all get out that I'm doing stuff that I was taught not to do. So not so much shame, but certainly a lot of guilt. You know, Lutherans were good on guilt. We're a little light on shame, but we're good on guilt because that sense of that, how can that make me change? I didn't want to look at my own stuff. So, you know, I'm up at church camp being an associate to Pastor Youngdahl at Cathedral of the Pines, and he pulls me aside the summer before I go to OCS. He says, hey, I want you to come back next year and fulfill your destiny and be a pastor. And I said, well, you're out of your mind? Pastors are really smart and they're really holy. Guess who's neither? Right? I do leave a good example. Rich Fino from Christ Presbyterian Church, we were at St. John's same time. He says, Kalland, you do nothing but bring hope to people. I says, what are you talking about? This is a guy he says, I'm hung like loose as a screen door. He says, people come up to me and say, Kalland, you bring so much hope. What are you talking about? So people say, hey, if Jesus can save Kalland, there's got to be hope for me. Complete self-absorbed. So I go to officer candidate school and do really well at officer candidate school. It was great. I've always had a deep abiding love and respect for our military, and still do to this day. Those brave men and women who go to battle, and it's like, I pray for a time when we don't get to do that, of course. So I come back, start drinking again, don't accept my commission. So now it's the continuation of the circle. I'm a piece of phlegm, I'm a piece of crap, and the downward. So what do? That I find comfort in alcohol, weed, cocaine. Really, that really set me over the edge was that first drink at 5 years old. I have a disease that wants to kill me. It's called alcoholism. It's not alcoholism, even though you're not drinking. The isms are still there, right? I can still wreck a one-car parade just like that. Left to my own devices, I need to have a daily surrender to the God of my understanding. I have some wonderful friends who are far more conservative in their theology. And we have some friends, I think, maybe we can relate to some of this. Some of us think that they're so heavenly minded, they're of no earthly good, that you have to behave in a certain way before God will love you. Or the halo's on so tight it cuts all the circulation off to their brain. You know what I'm talking about? I have a God that is beyond my comprehension. I happen to love Jesus. I can't get out of bed without him. Everyone notices if I do. But I think because we are loved by God first, we can try to love others and not change them, but love them. And that's still a hard thing for me to be, because I can still be king baby. You know, I can still be I want what I want when I want it. I can still give God the one finger wave, and I know God can handle all that stuff. So terrible. I go to treatment, right? Because I'm such a loser. I couldn't even pull the trigger to blow my brains out in the car. I go back to this Pastor Paul Youngdahl, knowing I got a problem and I got friends beating me up, literally and figuratively, saying, you got a problem, you got a problem. I go tell Youngdahl my whole story. I mean, confess and let it all hang out. And he's done listening. I'm done. I've been crying, snot flowing, all that kind of good stuff. Not the Scandinavian stuff, but the right? And so what does the boss say to me? Well, what do you want me to do about it? Well, of course, then that passive-aggressive Norwegian comes out in me, and I told him to take a flying and a rolling donut. Can't you fix this for me? Can't you say some magic mumbo-jumbo prayer to fix this? You anger, outward, textbook alcoholic, drug addict. It's great. So go to treatment. Before that, I go to the church counselor. Across the street, we have a counseling office from church. And I'm taking the MMPI. Anyone ever taken the MMPI? Isn't that a great one? Okay, how about this one? Question 598. Do you have dark, tarry bowel movements? Right? I don't know. I don't look. Right? It's like, who look? Never mind. So you go to this, and I'm in the bathroom snorting cocaine while I'm taking the MMPI because I got a problem, but can't you fix it for me? Can't you? So what happens? Go to treatment. John McClay was the counselor. All these people that God's putting in my life, just like God put you in my life tonight to help me stay sober. You're a precious gift from God, made in the image and likeness of God. I read the big book, right there. You are image and likeness of God, right? So go to treatment. But, I'm from Edina, so I didn't want to go inpatient. Edina, every day I need attention. My ego is showing up. My ego is showing up 10 days or 20 days before I do, right? I'm so full of crap. I mean, I got a problem. Can't you fix it for me? So while I'm going to treatment outpatient, I'm snorting cocaine in the afternoon and evening with my girlfriend. Well, she wasn't because I didn't really want her to use it, but I was using people, and it was horrible. So what happens? An envelope of cocaine falls out of my pocket, and my girlfriend rats me out to my counselor. So then my counselor pulls me aside. Rosie Capon, Bushnell Building, Abbott Northwestern, helped save my life. She said, you're done, get out. You haven't taken this seriously forever. And then, that was that popping sound, right? When we pull our heads out of our butts. Oh, yeah, I got a problem, and his name is Kurt, right? So talk to Rosie, says it starts to get better. So I went to treatment in September 19th, but I don't have a sobriety date till October 5th, I think. I don't know my sobriety date. My sponsor told me to pick a day. Every day. It's like, are you born again? Every day. Sorry. So go to treatment, start going to whiskey meetings. I go to my first whiskey meetings at the church I'm working at. There's a woman who's coming in across the parking lot. And you ever have God show up in your life? You've had God moments, right? It's Mary from my dad's service station. I've been working on her cars for years. And I'm in church and I'm nervous like a hound dog passing a peach pit, going to your first whiskey meeting, right? Right, good image, sorry. And here's Mary, and she says, Kurt, what are you doing here? And it just fell out. I'm going to my first meeting. She reaches her arms out, hugs me. So Jesus showed up about that tall. Mary was about that tall. And then more tears. It's like, I can go tell on myself to someone, and she won't judge me. She won't condemn me. So I start going to meetings, and I'm really having a hard time. So now it's Easter. We're late for church. The Kallands are never late, right? You got to get there early and get it over with. We went to the 9 o'clock service, and we always sat on the pulpit side, right? You have assigned seats in church? We always thought the communists and lowriders sat on the lectern side. So it's like, oh. We were the third pew behind the third pillar on the pulpit side. Dad was on the end, Paul, me, Mom. Then they had to put Mom between us because Paul and I fought in church. Anyway. It's great to preach your first sermon at you and watch your father fall asleep. It's just so humbling. It's like, thank you, God. Anyway, it's Easter, we're late, we're sitting on the wrong side of church, and I don't know if I'm supposed to, I don't know what I'm doing. Do I want to end my life? Really, can I pull the trigger this time? I'm not doing what I've been told to do, right? It's horrible, depressed state. And so, end of the service, at church, there's all the flowers up front. I don't remember anything the Reverend said. There was music, and it stunk really nice in there because it's all those flowers up there. So Shorty's walking down the aisle at the end of the service, and he's scanning the crowd, looking for people, and I'm on the aisle on the wrong side, right? He walks up to me, stops, Shorty, the guy, Paul Youngdahl, right? And he grabs my shoulders, and he said, Jesus Christ died on the cross and rose from the dead for you too, Kurt. Forgive yourself. Whew. Best sermon I ever heard. It's like, yeah, get off the cross, Kurt. We need the wood. Quit playing God. Surrender your will and your life over to the care of God as you understand Him. I still go to meetings because I need help pulling this out of this. I have people in my life that I never would have known life could be this good. I've been married to my first wife for 34 years. She still lets me sleep in the big bed. Pray for her. Her name is Dawn. I'm the largest source of natural gas on the face of the earth, and I have cigar breath that could just kill a small dog. And she's just an amazing woman. Source of strength for me. I can tell her stuff. I can't tell her stuff. Do you ever have those things where you can't tell people things? Well, some things you just can't say. But there are other times all it needs is a hug. I feel so safe. She's about 10, 12, 15 pounds. And I'm 180 something? Trained by the Marines to kill you 5 different ways with a pencil. I feel like a pile of goo in her arms when she hugs me. Fabulous. 2 beautiful daughters who look more like their mother, thank God. Neither one's got my big nose or mustache. One's happily married to her first husband. Yes, I did a background check on both of the boys the girls are dating. Hello, right? I volunteer as a chaplain for the Edina Police Department. They actually let me sit in the front seat because I was always in the back with bracelets. By the way, if you get arrested, see if the officer can do it here. It's so much easier on your shoulders, right? And then pray for those poor stiffs that are out there every single day, right? There's some really, really bad pastors out there. There's a lot of good pastors out there. There's a little bit of bad hose draggers out there. There's a lot of good ones. There's some really bad cops out there. Most of them are wonderful. Pray for those first responders. My friend Pastor Dale over here took a nosedive off of a bike the other day, and God showed up, right, as an ER doc. And then the EMTs show up and all that stuff. And I think it's time for me to be done, isn't it? Couple more minutes? Really? How about bad jokes? Does anyone do clown ministry? No. Who likes clowns? Who doesn't care about clowns? Okay, so how do you defend yourself if you are attacked by a gang of clowns come at you? How do you defend yourself? What do you do? Tell them a joke. Oh, I like that. Tell them a joke. What else do you do? Duck and roll. Nice. No, you go for the juggler. Ooh. Ooh. That's 2/3 of a pun. That's a PU. I'm having more fun now being sober than I ever realized I could have. I never knew life could be this good. We have challenges in our lives? Absolutely. My favorite older brother, both of my brothers are now dead. Mom and dad are dead. God rest their souls. My brother Paul was in town about a week before he died in May. We went to a church camp to put docs in. We call ourselves the White Whales. Gray-haired, fat, ugly, white men who are out of shape. We put docs in. Tell the same jokes we've been telling forever. Paul gets home, goes on Memorial Day to a thing, and on the way back, a 16-year-old driving for the first time without her parents in the car hit and killed him. So, takeaway, you folks taught me this. Pray for the poor 16-year-old woman who hit him. And what the hell she's got to be going through, right? I know exactly where my brother is. He and the guy in the sky were tight, right? You know, this is a guy who used to fly planes off of an aircraft carrier. Whew. I never smoked that kind of dope. I don't know about you guys. The postage stamp floating in the middle of the lake, and I'm going to just fly the plane down there. And he would say, well, you got to pay attention. So duh. So I get a call, and it's my sister-in-law, and I didn't want to talk to her because I was tired, and she called 3 times. Dawn finally answers, and you get the message, your brother died in a car accident. So what have you taught me to do? Pray. So I said the Lord's Prayer in a way that I've never said it before. And then what did you tell me to do? Call your friends. Those grade school kids that I hung out with, who did I call first, though? My sponsor. Could barely talk. My brother died. And about 7 minutes later, there's 8 guys on my deck, loving me up and loving up my brother Paul. And I would not have that if I were still using, because someone in their life reminded me the story that there's this guy out there who loves you. And there's nothing you can do that's ever going to take that away from you. Oh, what I've done is so horrible, God could never forgive me. We'd think that. We get into some of that stinking thinking, well, who did the Jewish carpenter hang out with? Tax collectors, prostitutes, fishermen. You don't think fishermen swore or smelled bad, did they? I know we're to try to carry the message. Sometimes we can use words. Oftentimes it's just showing up on someone's deck and being with them. You can practice the presence. What does it say in that big book? The Lord knit you together in your mother's womb. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. You. So when you look in the mirror when you go home, don't concentrate on your nose or, gee, my ears are small for my head. No, my head's just really fat. You know, precious gift from God. Last I checked, God doesn't make junk, and he didn't start with you. Other jokes. I think we're done, right? Yeah, we're done. Goodbye. I love you. Thanks for letting me be here.
Well, I'm glad I got that last story out of you. That was a nice way to finish. Thank you for that. That was, am I right about him being really sick? He's sick in the right way. Yeah. So we have a special greeting from the Lieutenant Governor of the state of Minnesota.
Hello everyone, Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan here. Welcome to Minnesota. We're honored to have you here in our great state and for your continued leadership to raise awareness across faith communities about addiction and its impact. This is an issue that is often deeply personal and more complicated than a simple solution. But at the center of it are people, our friends and families, and often trauma and systems that too often leave folks behind. The burden of substance use disorder and drug overdose continues to impact families and communities across Minnesota and across the country, particularly our Latinx, Black, and Indigenous communities. From 2019 to 2020, the Minnesota Department of Health reported an increase of 27% in overdose deaths. And according to most recent data, our Native people were 9 times more likely to experience a non-fatal overdose and 7 times more likely to experience a fatal overdose than their white counterparts. This could be in part to a number of reasons: historic and systemic racism, inequitable access to resources people need to live healthy life, and the lack of culturally informed approaches for healing multi-generational trauma. All in all, this data are heartbreaking. That's why Minnesota has made it a priority to make sure that treatment and support services are available in a timely manner by ensuring that healthcare facilities are equipped to treat the whole patient and the whole person. We're not there yet, but it must be how we approach this work, and in partnership with advocates and caregivers who are in direct relationship and have lived experience with these issues. That's why we're also working to build on and strengthen our community-driven efforts. As a state, we realize that communities are critical in prevention, treatment, and recovery. Research consistently points to the value of traditional healing practices designed and delivered by Indigenous communities themselves. And it shows that traditional healing for Native people has outcomes equivalent to conventional interventions in other populations. In 2019, this practice was a priority in our administration's first biennial budget, and it included $4 million for traditional healing grants and support for tribal opioid investigations. While this was just a first step and we have prevention programs throughout the state, more is needed to reverse these devastating trends. As faith leaders, there is a role to serve in this work. This is about awareness, education, and action. Educating yourselves about the importance of culturally relevant, trauma-informed approaches matter. And investing in public health and community organizations doing the work matters. With your continued advocacy and encouragement to those who are seeking addiction help and support, I believe that we can make progress. Thank you so much for your work. Chimi Gwetch for all that you do for your surrounding communities. We appreciate you.
So along the way of doing the work of Center of Addiction and Faith, I've been able to meet some amazing people. And one of the people I got introduced to was this Reverend Jan Brown. Somebody said, have you met Jan Brown? I said, uh-uh. And they said, oh my gosh, you got to be kidding. So they hooked us up. We started talking, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe she's been doing this work forever. And she's doing more of what we would love to see congregations do than anyone else I know. I mean, she's really equipping people to do amazing things. And so I got to know her, and I asked her, would you possibly be our keynote speaker? And I was crossing my fingers, and she said, let me pray about it. And she came back, and she said, I think I would like to do that. In fact, how about if we do some more stuff? And so she offered to do the breakouts, and she offered to do the worship service. Actually, I think you were all lined up to do the breakouts and the worship service, and then we lost Sonia. And then I said, would you be the keynote? She said, yes. And I said, well, you can't do all those other things, too, and be a keynote speaker. And she said, I can do that. So she's been teaching all day. She led worship last night and did the blessing. And I don't know where you get the energy, but I'm glad you're willing to do this. We're excited to have you here. And I'm looking forward to working with you in the days ahead. And please welcome Jan Brown.
My name is Jan. I am a woman with addiction and long-term recovery. And what that means is I haven't used drugs or alcohol for the past 34 years, God willing. It'll be 35 in January. And so being in recovery allows me to do some pretty amazing things. I serve as a deacon for Bruton Parish Church in the Diocese of Southern Virginia. I've also created Spirit Works Foundation, which is a nonprofit recovery community organization, and some other things that I've gotten to do. What I'm going to be sharing with you tonight is about recovery and recovery experiences. And of course, I had everything all done. And then I heard through the day and even last night after Tim's presentation some questions. And so we've changed a few things up to be able to respond to some of the questions and the comments that people have had. is that there are many, many different definitions of recovery. What they all have in common is that they go beyond abstinence and remission. So can we all agree on that? All right, now here's where it gets hard. So back in 2006, Betty Ford Institute, they had a consensus conference, and they came up with the top definition of recovery. A voluntary maintained lifestyle characterized, the entry point being sobriety, personal health, and citizenship. And then William White, who's a dear friend of mine, came up with this very long definition of recovery. And sadly, it happens to be my favorite definition of recovery because it talks about a lot of the things that those of us in recovery do. It mentions families and communities. It means problem resolution. So it's a definition that I quite enjoy. However, in 2011, SAMHSA came up with this definition. So it's a process of change through which individuals improve their health and wellness, live a self-directed life, and strive to achieve their full potential. What's missing from this definition? Does not mention abstinence, does not mention any of those things that have to do with sobriety. And so a lot of us who are recovery advocates challenged that definition because we didn't like it. So that was done in 2011. It still remains the definition today. We still have problems with it. Some of us advocates continue to work on where they tell us that we are included is we're improving our health and wellness, right? And so, okay, but we wanted a little bit more. So here we go. 2013, right? The American Society of Addiction Medicine says that recovery addresses biological, psychological, social, and spiritual disturbances that are inherent in addiction. So then they made a lot of us happy because they used the word spiritual. But only certain people get to have access to that definition. Then in 2017, we got another. Recovery Research Institute gave us another, the Recovery Research Institute, which has an amazing site. They have what's called a dictionary, which I commend everyone to if you want to know definitions of different words that are related. However, once again, they have given us a definition that's related to suffering from a substance-related condition. You catching on? We don't really know, right? Then in 2019, we got another new one. An individualized, intentional, dynamic, and relational process. So, Jan, I hear you're in recovery. Yes, I have an individualized, intentional, dynamic. I mean, really? So now, and the most controversial of them all, and the one that is the most embraced by the recovery advocacy community, is that you are in recovery if you say you are. People are like, oh. Yeah, so that is the Connecticut Community for Addiction Recovery is one of the preeminent recovery community organizations in the country. Phil Valentine is their executive director, and he came up with that definition. And some of you heard me say this earlier today, and while it is helpful to people who are not in recovery, it makes no sense at all. To clinicians, it's very challenging because how on earth do you measure that? But the purpose of creating it in the first place was because people got to decide for themselves, right? So if you went to particular meetings, you were told that if you were taking a medication that you really weren't in recovery, and in other meetings. And so the goal was to allow people to be empowered to define recovery for themselves. We also know the problems that are inherent with that. The big issue around all of it is that it's very confusing, right? So scientists and researchers want to measure this thing called recovery. When we're talking with people beyond, those of us in the know, whatever that means, they don't understand what recovery is at all, right? The general public thinks that we're still struggling, that we haven't resolved our alcohol and or drug problems. And so when they hear us talk about recovery, it's very confusing for them. Here we look at cultures and communities, right? So white bison, which has the well-briety movement. If you are not involving family members and cultural and communities, then you're not talking about recovery for many indigenous people, particularly those who utilize white bison. For African Americans, if you're not talking usually about abstinence, you're not talking about recovery, right? And so we need to know those things when we're working with people who are talking about themselves as being in recovery. Now it's going to get more difficult. Right, so then we've got the definitional complexity, abstinence versus remission versus recovery. And a gentleman talked to me earlier today, and I hope he's here tonight, because we talked about what's even beyond recovery. And so we're going to look at that as well. The problem is that most clinical outcomes and community research that has been done, as well as treatment centers, do not have outcome measures that are based on recovery. And that's pretty sad. And then we wonder why the outcomes aren't very successful. A lot of them have changed their names, right? So we run across a lot of, places that used to be treatment centers are now called recovery centers. And some of that is about they can get money for being a recovery center and not necessarily being a treatment center. But what they're measuring is abstinence or remission, right? So that means if you leave and you return to use, that you weren't successful. How do we do that? How do we do that? How do we measure somebody's success based on whether they use or not? And that's how we define recovery, especially when there's no studies that indicate that that's what that is. Another piece of complexity. It's going to get better, y'all. So what we started looking at then was pathways and styles of recovery. So some of the distinctions, if you will, you can put them into two different buckets, if you will. So one describes people's individual experiences, and the other one describes people's beliefs and values. So that's kind of the distinction, if you will, within the two big categories that then can make sense to individuals and families, communities, church communities, faith communities as well. So one of the things we're trying to do is really extend this to bring in faith communities, because we have a super role to play. And it's wonderful because it's a role that no one else or no other community can play. So scope of recovery. This is one of the considerations. Are we talking about primary, or are we talking about primary and secondary recovery, right? So most treatment centers focus on addiction health. Now we're starting to hear the word like holistic health, right? That's primary and secondary. So when they're looking at additional issues beyond whether somebody is using or not using, we're looking at co-occurring disorders, right? That was the first place that we started. Do these folks have mental health challenges? We're looking at physical health-related things. And so those are a bigger way to look at this thing called recovery. Types of recovery. This is controversial, but that's okay. So we've got abstinence-based recovery. That's where we stop our relationship with our primary drug or drugs and any other non-medical use. And so sometimes it's tricky, right? Because they exclude nicotine and caffeine. It's a tough one. Oh, they're having fun over there without us. Because when Betty Ford did they did their definition out there, they said not very many people would meet this thing called recovery. And they didn't want to offend people who already believe that they're in recovery. That's a tough one. So then we look at moderation-based recovery. People have a hard time with that. So what that often looks like is people who at one time met diagnostic criteria for heroin addiction, and they can still drink and drink safely. I am not one of those people. They exist. And it's hard for those of us who are in abstinence-based recovery, and that's what we learned, and that's what we believe, and there are people who can do it. And it's not the same thing as harm reduction, just to make that distinction. This is, and I find, I mean, even for myself, I'm a 12-stepper, and all of those things are wonderful, and how I put my own personal recovery is in that moderation place, right? So red, yellow, and green. There are red behaviors and substances that are off limits all the time. Those are red, right? I cannot do one of those peyote walks that I'd like to do in this lifetime, right? Maybe next time. I cannot use cocaine safely. So those are red. There are other behaviors, but I won't tell you what they are, that are red for me. And then yellow is with a plan, accountability, and a reason that I can use those substances or behaviors. And what that looks like is if somebody is going to have a surgery, right? We've taught people to be afraid of particular types of medication. And actually what we're doing is we are causing harm to many of them. With a plan, a reason, and accountability, a person can have a surgery and take a necessary medication. And then there's things that are green, right? So I can't eat too many green vegetables. You know, so these are sky's the limit. Behavior, I can't exercise too much, you know. So those are things within my recovery. And I borrowed that system of recovery from people who have eating disorders, right? Because they still have to eat. You know, and some folks who have issues around sex disorders, right? So they use red, yellow, and green as a way to live. And I do as well. So I'm an Episcopalian. We use wine for our sacrament. And so when I was going through the process, I was really afraid because I was like, wow, how am I going to get to do this? Because there's wine. And I had a rector who was my internship supervisor, and her piety says that all the wine that's left at the altar has to be consumed. So then I was like, oof, I really don't think I can do that. And so one day I was like, okay, I'll try. But it was a lot left. So I decided that was a bad idea. There are times when I will intinct. There are times when I will kiss the chalice. There are times when I might even let it touch my lips, right? And none of those have inspired me to run out and get a drink, right? So that's a yellow behavior. There are people, Lauren's one of them, and other people, because she serves at Bruton with me. But one day I was doing something and Lauren got so worried because she saw me lift the chalice and she's like, did you drink all that? But I was cleaning it. So I've got the accountability. I've got people watching what I'm doing to be able to support me in that. If there's so much, I'll just put it to the side and I'll cover it. So again, people are working with me so that I can live into my call. Equally, right, how many of us like really good cookies that we don't make ourselves? A few of us, yes, lots of us. Usually, those cookies have vanilla in them, which has a lot of alcohol in it. How many of us eat shrimp? If you go out for shrimp, it's often cooked in beer. Cod, cooked in beer. So there's a lot of food. And I know that we've heard, it's not true, I know we've heard that it all cooks off, right? A lot of us have heard that. That's not true. A lot of it does, but not all of it. Some of us drink, there's a new Heineken beer that's out, right? You know, for some of that's a slippery slope, and that we wouldn't have that be part of our recovery. But some people can do it. Some people can do it. And so part of what I'm inviting you all to do is to just kind of hear this stuff and see, well, what do I think about that? Because it's usually our bias that gets in the way of us being able to be servants and leaders for other people. The final one, which has caused a tremendous amount of problems, is medication-assisted recovery, right? But we're funny people, because we don't tell somebody who is taking Lipitor that they're not in recovery. We tell people who are taking methadone that they're not in recovery. We tell people who are taking buprenorphine that they're not in recovery, which is Suboxone, yes. We tell them they're not in recovery. We don't tell somebody who's taking a different kind of medication that they're not in recovery, right? We don't. Or at least I haven't run across people who have. So in terms of stigma and judgment, we do it to ourselves. We do it to ourselves. And yes, anybody, anytime wants to have a conversation with me on that, I would be happy to. As one who, for a period of time in my 34 years, took Vivitrol. Back then it was called Naltrexone. Did it work? I don't know. I didn't use. So I guess it did. I was going through a really stressful period of time in my life. And so it was like an insurance policy. And I'm grateful that I was taking it. So then we have context of recovery. Did you all know that there were so many parts to this thing called recovery? Which is why it's hard to define and hard. All of this makes it really hard, right? So there's this thing called solo recovery or natural recovery, which actually most people who are in recovery have gotten there this way. They woke up one morning and they decided that they weren't going to drink or use anymore. Again, not me. And most of them have, right, these things called intrapersonal and interpersonal resources, which essentially means they have enough of a reason to stop, and then they have the resources to help them stop and stay stopped. And these people aren't dry or white-knuckling or any of the things that we like to say. These are people for whom they've decided, a lot of times we see it with people who are young, or we'll hear, gosh, I used to do those things and I don't do them anymore. And it's like, what? But they really don't. And they have quality of life. We've got treatment-assisted recovery. Involves the use of professional help in the initiation and stabilization of recovery. Then we've got peer-assisted recovery, which we just heard a plug for, which is really exciting. Those are mutual aid groups, so those are our 12-step meetings and other types of meetings. There are also recovery support services, where people who have lived experience and some training are able to help and support people. So that's the context of recovery. Then we've got frameworks of recovery, right? So we've got religious frameworks, which is coming straight from somebody's religious perspective. Then we've got spiritual frameworks. Those are your 12-step mutual support group. So we've got the spiritual frameworks, right? Coming from wounded and looking at imperfection. For some, it's a religious and a spiritual context is how they frame their recovery. I've grown into being one of those folks. Then we've got secular-only recovery. And so those are pathways where they don't have a higher power, or they don't have the experience of spiritual awakening and spiritual experiences. Recovery identity. I was talking with somebody earlier and told them that I was going to mention recovery identity tonight. And what that's about is, for many folks, they are considered recovery neutral. So they resolved their problem with alcohol and or drugs, and they've moved on with their life. And they do not identify or consider themselves to be in recovery. The majority of people identify that way. That's why we can say there are 23 million people in recovery, and when we ask them to stand up, not very many do. We've also got recovery positive people. So that's a person like me who goes out and around and talks about being in recovery. Sometimes I'm sure to my detriment, but I do it anyway because I don't know any other way. And then we've got recovery negative folks. And they acknowledge it to themselves, but because of shame, they don't share it with other people. I heard some yes. And that's a hard one. That's a hard one. And part of what's starting to happen, because we're starting to look at using different words, right? So we were invited, and I'm going to have you all try this on, we were invited to stop using the word recovery. Ooh, got some faces at me. I'll look over here. How y'all doing with that? Thoughts, getting rid of the word recovery. Since we don't know what the definition is, right? Terminology, right? Are you in recovery? Are you recovered? Are you recovering? What do we think? So some of us are recovering, okay? So what makes you say you're recovering?
Sorry. I said I'm recovering because I'll always be recovering.
Okay.
Because I'm Presbyterian and we're reformed but always reforming.
That was good.
I rarely use that language except when I'm trying to be generic with people. You know, like I'll say like what my clean date is, or I'm working such and such a step or whatever, but rarely do I say that at all. You know, and it's usually for purposes of like a group like this. I mean, which is very unnatural to how I actually live my life.
Absolutely. And part of that is about words mattering, right? And so and some of you have seen the fancy things. I was going to put it in, but there's so many of them, right? What do you say, and when do you say it, and how are you supposed to say it? And that's huge. It's a huge issue right now. Is it substance abuse, substance use disorder, all of those things. And so how do you know? Usually how I know is I ask the person, how would you like me to refer to you? So that's a really big way that you usually can't go wrong. Where we're really struggling is coming from people who have been part of anonymous programs to people being kind of recovering out loud, if you will. Which is why when I come up, I say my name is Jan, I'm a woman with addiction, so that I identify in, and I'm a person in long-term recovery. And there's messaging training about how to do that and why to do that. Because people have their own preconceived notions about what an addict is, right? We also have a preconceived notion, and we had a bit of this conversation earlier, about clean and dirty, right? And so people in a particular mutual support group, which this gentleman said that he was in earlier today, that's a part of their recovery identity, to identify as being clean. They're not looking at the opposite of clean being dirty, which the people out there are, right? So we have probation officers and others who say that person popped dirty, right? So they're not looking at the fact that they may have been in recovery and were clean. They're looking at dirty. And so at the level of meetings, when you're in a particular mutual support group meeting, and that's the culture of that meeting, absolutely identify in that way. But when we come out, if we want to remove some of the discrimination and the stigma, we've got to be willing to risk speaking a language that other people speak when we come out. That's non-stigmatizing, right? If I'm coming out and I'm telling you, my name is Jan and I'm an addict. Now, you guys would be okay with that. But if I went down the hall and I said that, not so much, right? They'd grab their pocketbooks, they'd get on their phones, they'd say, gosh, they'd start texting, did you know we were with this woman? She's an addict. But if I were to say, gosh, sir, my name is Jan and I'm in recovery and these are all the amazing things, they're going to lean in and they're going to clap for me, just like y'all did. Right, so it depends upon the context, right? When I was a little kid, my parents taught me that there's a time and place for everything. And so I think that's a better rule of thumb than the one that, I mean, in fairness to you, sir, we overcorrected is what I think we did. We said, don't say this, always say this instead. And so we got that part wrong. Because what we did was stigmatize and shame people who are in recovery, who are brothers and sisters, instead of saying, okay, let's link arms and do this thing. Does that make sense to folks? And so it's about a time and place. And if we're ever going to really achieve this thing called non-stigma and reduce some of the discrimination, this is where these words are the ones that are so loaded, right? If you're an insurance agent or an insurance company, You don't want to pay for somebody who's recovering, because it means that you got to pay for ever and ever and ever, which is why they terminate a lot of people's benefits. Which is why, what is it called? If you've got a pre-existing condition is so important, because a lot of people were having their benefits removed and canceled because they were recovering, right? 25 years later, you know, I applied for, I don't mind saying it, USAA, and I was turned down because I went to rehab 25 years prior to that time. When I was going through the ordination process, I thought being in recovery was going to be good for my ministry. But when you take some of those tests, it doesn't look so good when you have to answer those questions honestly. And at the end of it doesn't say, you know, within the past 5 years, right? It just asks you, did you ever drink too much? It's like, yep. Did you ever do that? Yep. So when you looked at me on paper, I was a horrible candidate for anything, right? So those are things that get to be changed. But that's where a lot of the work has to be done. And those of us who are able to be out and who are able to advocate, by gosh, we better be able to do it. And because I know, and I learned yesterday from Tim, he's still in the screen, don't you know, that some people don't get to do the things that they are called to do, right? He has never preached. That's just as heartbreaking to me. It just blows my mind. But I also know that other people haven't been able to get jobs and do things, or have lost their jobs. For the people that we find value in society, it is a medical issue, right? We do get all of the things that we need are brought to bear so that we can get well and stay well. But we haven't gotten there for everybody. And I think part of how we're going to get there is to really work through some of this. A couple weeks ago, I got to do a really cool thing. There was a conference in Nevada, and I chose not to go for the right reasons. And I got a phone call, and the person said that former President Clinton would like to interview you. And I'm like, yeah, okay, sure. And so then I got a call from his people, because he has a huge initiative, which I didn't know, for faith communities. He too is convinced that we have got to show up and that we have something that isn't at the table. And so he brought myself and 3 other people. And it was interesting because usually you come to things and people want to ask you, you know, we get to ask him a question. But he arranged it, so we agreed. So this is a really short clip. One of the things that he asked us at the very end was kind of, if you could do one thing, and you'll notice I said more than one, but anyhow, I couched it as one.
Yeah, I think I come at it from a slightly different place, and I think you'll be able to relate to a bit of this, that there's a piece of scripture from my religious tradition that says something to the effect of, do not judge so that you may not be judged. That when we are in judgment of others, that we too are being judged. In other words, that we give what we get. And it says that we notice the speck in another's eye without seeing the log in our own eyes. And while we are so busy trying to take the speck out of their eyes, the log continue to remain in ours. And so the one thing I would ask Americans and whomever, and certainly including each of us, is to, whenever we need to take the log out of our own eyes so that we can clearly see, to take the speck out of someone else's eyes. And for me, what that looked like when I entered the program of recovery, I was given a prescription, and that prescription said, trust God, clean house, help others. And I continue to live by that instruction. And now, given this opportunity from you, I would ask everybody else to do the same. So you know, will you, whoever you is, in order to mobilize recovery across the country, trust in that which you consider divine, examine your life, and bring love and joy to the lives of others. And practically what that could look like, for individuals who are in recovery, it means that we understand that one size does not fit all, right? That there are multiple pathways to and of recovery, and we need to accept them. For family members and others who are concerned, it means that we understand that behaviors make sense and that there are reasons for our loved ones' use, and we need to listen to them. For our communities, it means that we understand that overdose, addiction, and recovery are health issues, and they must be treated and supported as such, and that we need to use science and have compassion. And then, as mentioned, for our regulators and policymakers, it means that we are to understand that addiction is a chronic health issue, not a criminal issue, and that we need to establish and maintain an effective system of health care. And finally, to my colleagues as faith leaders, it means that we are to understand that addiction is a complicated biopsychosocial spiritual disorder, not a moral failure, and that we need to respect everyone's dignity and that we need to help people heal.
I will say this, I do believe that one of the very few things that we have actually made progress on in bringing the American people together across these gaping partisan, cultural, racial, and other divides is the idea that we need to stop talking about this whole thing as if it's a criminal justice issue. It's a public health issue. And I think that there are all kinds of reasons for it. Some noble, some practical, some maybe, even less than admirable. But the point is, almost everybody agrees with that now. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's a good place to begin. But it is a beginning. We still have to be able to scale the ability to reach people with.
So that's the piece, right? Is the recognition that this is an area where we mostly agree, right? And we've got a special place that we get to occupy that others don't. And so for us, it's about, stretching and learning that there are multiple pathways to and of recovery, and that some people are going to do it differently than we do it, or than we may even think they ought to be doing it. But we don't get to say, right? We don't get to say. One of the wonderful things that's happened with the Biden administration happened on September 30th, which was International Recovery Day. And what they did, some of us would suggest was long overdue. However, we are grateful, was he created an Office of Recovery Services nationally, right? And what a funny thing, right? So forever we call this thing recovery-oriented systems of care. And we say all of those things, but we didn't have a definition for recovery, nor did we have an office for recovery. But we pointed to these recovery-oriented systems. Didn't make a whole lot of sense. But that's okay. Regina LaBelle did a really good thing for us as people in recovery and advocates, because she was a person who fought for that. We've seen a carve out of 10% of block grant dollars that are going to come to the states. 10% of those are going to be designated for recovery and recovery support. Wanted 20, but we'll take 10. Because what our belief system is that as people measure that and we actually have some of these outcomes that we talked about earlier, we can show positive gains and success. Because we anecdotally have those, right? As people who are in recovery, as families that have been able to come back together again, as communities continue to thrive, as lives are transformed, we know that recovery is possible. We have people in here who can prove that. But we also need to know how and why it's possible and be able to demonstrate that. So one of the things that's so exciting to me about what we bring, right? So as people of faith, that what we know is that beyond this thing called recovery, and we talked about it a little bit before, comes this thing called transformation. That's our sweet spot. Right? For mortals, it is impossible, but for God, all things are possible. And so these are some of my favorite scriptures. Y'all have your favorites too, and that's wonderful. But we know what the experience of transformation is. When Jesus said, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." Transformation. Be careful then how you live, not as unwise people, but as wise, making the most of the time because the days are evil. So do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. Do not get drunk with wine, for that is debauchery, but be filled with the Spirit. Transformation. Everyone then who hears the words of mine and acts on them will be like a wise man who has built his house on rock. The rain fell, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall because it had been founded on rock. Lauren gave me that one. So if anyone is in Christ, there is a new creation. Everything old has passed away. See, everything has become new. He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be afraid, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my victorious right hand. And again, there are countless others. But that's what we have, right? We have that experience of transformation. And so that's what everyone else doesn't necessarily have. I like to call it our secret sauce. That's ours. And it's not like the kingdom can't be extended, but that's ours. And that's what we get to share with others. Thank you.